I'm interested in Saagar's reaction to this. There's a big debate over whether this is meaningful at all. Put this up on the screen. Biden just, on the day that he was traveling to Michigan, a state with a significant Arab American population, issued an executive order sanctioning 4 Israeli settlers over West Bank violence. He says that violence in the West Bank has reached, quote, intolerable levels. The sanctions, I'm reading from this article from the BBC, block the individuals from accessing all U.S. property assets in the American financial system. Violence in the West Bank has spiked since Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel on October 7th. Some 370 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since then, in the West Bank, guys, according to the UN. The majority of those have been killed by Israeli forces, but at least 8 of them have been killed by Israeli settlers, the UN said. And as I mentioned, no accident that this, what I would consider a sort of like symbolic gesture of caring about the rule of law and violence against Palestinians comes on a day when Biden was traveling to Michigan. The Arab American Institute quoted in this article of pointing out that support by Arab Americans for the Democratic Party has plummeted from 59%, that was in 2020, to just 17%. These sanctions can't be applied to American citizens, although some of them are thought to be involved in the violence. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said the U.S. does believe the sanctions will have an impact on these 4 individuals and expects Israel to do more to hold accountable those responsible for settler violence. What do you think about this move, Saagar?
I mean, it just seems, look, it seems rather toothless. At the same time, it is having it's 2 things. Obviously, it is the correct decision, I think, if that is going to be the stated U.S. policy of saying that we are a pro-2-state solution, then you can't be endorsing or not having sanctions on the West Bank, especially because, I don't know if people know this, there are American citizens who are inside the West Bank who are currently being prevented from actually passing into Israel, which is an Israeli violation of the U.S. visa law that we currently have with them, because we have, anyway, in terms of our citizenship. Much of this is downstream of the overall settler policy. Now, the actual sanctions that have been put into place, as you said, are only on 4 people. Clearly, they should probably be extended to them, to a much larger group of people who are involved in the overall action, because it is a direct contravention of stated U.S. State Department policy going back at least 2 decades. The thing is that even with the 4, as you said, it is still receiving like maximalist pushback inside of Israel.
Yeah.
Because it is being denounced as anti-Semitic. But it does actually show you the extension of the power of the U.S. empire, because they can cry all they want. Their banks are still complying with the order now, because if you want to do business with America and you are in violation of OFAC, you will get your ass handed to you in the global financial system.
Yeah. And so a few things about the specifics of this executive order, and I think your points are all really well taken there. I mean, first of all, let's just keep in mind, every one of these settlements is illegal under international law and in contravention of U.S. state, long-standing U.S.
Let's
State
just stick
Department
with U.S. policy. It is against U.S. policy.
It is against U.S. policy. It also is considered, a blanket around the globe illegal according to international law. So both of those things are true. So when you have a policy that's just aimed at 4 people who, were directly violent and inciting violence against Palestinians, it's almost like a tacit, like, well, the settlements themselves are okay, but there's just a few bad apples that we want to go after. That's number 1. Number 2, I think it's very telling that of the 370 Palestinians who've been killed in the West Bank since October 7th, 8 of them were killed by Israeli settlers. Now, there's been massive violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinians, and that has ramped up post-October 7th. Even before October 7th, this was one of the most violent years on record in terms of settler violence against Palestinians. But the overwhelming majority of Palestinians are being killed by the government. So there's a sort of feint here, or an idea here, that, the government's official policy isn't these settlers and isn't being pursued. The government's ends aren't being pursued by the settlers who are continuing to violently push Palestinians off of their land. When in fact, for decades, under both right-wing and supposedly liberal prime ministers, the settlements have continued to expand, and this has been official government policy of the Israeli government. And oftentimes, when settlers are engaging in violence against Palestinians, they are being backed up by the IDF. In fact, Saagar, you'll recall that part of why they were caught so unawares on October 7th, and the response was such shit to protect their own Israeli citizens on October 7th was because the IDF had been moved from that part of Israel near Gaza to the West Bank in order to protect these settlers. So, but to your point, it doesn't mean the fact that it's like toothless and doesn't really do anything and it's just sort of a symbolic, like pathetic gesture doesn't stop the Israelis from completely freaking out about it. Netanyahu responded, Israel takes action against all lawbreakers everywhere. What a bunch of bullshit that is. And therefore, there is no need for unusual measures on the issue. That's from Netanyahu's office. Put this next one up on the screen. Ben-Gvir reacted, urging the U.S. officials to rethink. President Biden's wrong about the citizens of the state of Israel and the heroic settlers. Those who are attacked, those who are pelted with stones in an attempt to hurt and murder them are the heroic settlers in Judea and Samaria. They're named for the West Bank. But this one, keep this up on the screen, is really incredible. Smotrich is basically calling Biden anti-Semitic. He says the settler violence campaign is an anti-Semitic lie that enemies of Israel disseminate to smear the pioneering settlers and the settlement enterprise and harm them and thus smear the entire state of Israel. So, you know, the fact that this is like policy is sort of pathetic ass covering some sort of, you know, sob to attempt to win back some portion of the Arab American population, which certainly is not going to happen so long as we're, you know, backing the Netanyahu government in every other way. That doesn't mean that the Israelis aren't going to completely freak out about it because they're not used to being checked by this administration in any way whatsoever.
Well, I think they're not really used to getting checked by the U.S. government.
That's
but
right.
It does demonstrate again to me that, you know, the arm of the empire is long. And, you know, like I said, just because you can bitch and moan, but your banks are going to have to cut your ass off if you want to do business with us. And this is, again, I mean, this is where I have to come back to. This is Israel. It's not Russia. It's not China. Russia's got a lot of oil. It's got a military base. China is the same thing. I mean, they may not have as much oil, but they have a lot of industry. They can build their own things. This is a tiny little strip of land which relies predominantly on exports and imports in order to keep their economy functioning. So when you're in that situation, you need to maintain ties with the global financial system, with everybody, you need the Red Sea to be functioning and all these things to have the basics of the modern Israeli way of life, which is like a first world European standard. It costs a lot to bring all these things in. And in that, then you need the support of the European Union, the United States, Russia, and China. And you're beginning to lose support and, you know, with all of these actors. Even here for America to put sanctions on the West Bank, it may be, as you said, a couple of people. It's still pretty extraordinary. It doesn't happen, you know, all that much in modern history. So for that for us to be in a part where this is being imposed and the standards and all that are being set, the overall showdown is going to happen at some point. Because at a certain point, let's say with the ceasefire, we're going to have a 2-month ceasefire. Let's say that happens. And the Israelis are torn about whether to restart or not. It's still going to come down to the fact that the United States policy and the Arab policy as well is to demand a 2-state solution. And then the question will come to America and others, are we going to impose sanctions on people who are in direct violation of overall American policy? Mm-hmm. Under Biden, that may not be, the answer may not be yes, but the answer may be yes sometime in the future. And as we have seen now, we have the Clinton administration who dealt with this problem and forward. Like this is, you know, the Carter administration, a generation before them. This is not going away. And so when you open these types of things as policies, for them as a country, it is genuinely existential.
There was a remarkable interview with Itamar Ben-Gvir by the Wall Street Journal, which had a lot of pieces which are quite noteworthy. Now, as I've been pointing out, he and Smotrich are willing to throw their weight around. Netanyahu has, you know, is barely holding on to power by his fingertips. And it's becoming increasingly impossible to keep this coalition together. Israelis overwhelmingly want Netanyahu gone, and he basically is just there but as long as the war goes on, which is why he wants the war to go on indefinitely. But put this up on the screen. They lay out in this Wall Street Journal piece, the headline is "The Israeli Firebrand Driving Netanyahu Further to the Right." Itamar Ben-Gvir spells out his plan for resettling Gaza. That would be ethnic cleansing during a rare interview, and says Trump would be better for Israel than President Biden. I mean, that shows you how crazy these people are, is that he doesn't think that Biden has gone far enough when this man has given unconditional support, rushed weapons there, circumvented U.S. policy in order to do so, et cetera, et cetera. But he thinks Trump would even provide them an even freer hand. It wouldn't even do the little like symbolic hand wringing that Biden does, basically. But what they write here is Ben-Gvir told the Wall Street Journal, Netanyahu is, quote, at a crossroads, and he has to choose in what direction he will go. He's got enough support, Ben-Gvir does, in the ruling coalition to undermine Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's rule, and he says he is willing to use it. In his first interview with a foreign news organization since joining the government, Ben-Gvir warned he would oppose any deal with Hamas that would free thousands of Palestinians held for terrorism or end the war before Hamas was fully defeated. Well, Hamas, there is no military solution to Hamas, as their own policymakers have said. This has probably only strengthened Hamas for the long term. An increasing portion of Israelis, they write, especially on the right, instead view the October 7th attack as a chance to start a new course for Israel by resettling the battle-scarred enclave. Ben-Gvir laid down his own plan for Gaza, which would repopulate the devastated coastal strip with Israeli settlements, while Palestinians would be offered financial incentives to leave. That was part of what was outlined at that ethnic cleansing resettlement conference that I covered recently, that we covered here on the show recently as well. Ben-Gvir also said he thought the Biden administration was hampering Israel's war effort and said he believed Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump would give Israel a freer hand to quash Hamas. Ben-Gvir's approach is gaining popularity. Once a fringe idea, a small majority of Jewish Israelis now fully or somewhat support the establishment of Jewish settlements inside Gaza, according to a poll conducted by Tel Aviv University last month. So, Saagar, he is actively threatening to blow up the Netanyahu coalition if any sort of a ceasefire is agreed to, which is why it's so important that you have the U.S. willing on the other side to use some sort of leverage and actual power in order to secure an end to this, because, I mean, this is a disaster for Palestinians, a disaster for Israelis, it's a disaster for us, for our interest in the region, for our service members, et cetera.
Yeah, we're just got to wait and see what happens, and that's why we're highlighting that interview, is because if we do have a ceasefire, he very much could move and he could, blow up the government, and then who the hell knows what comes next. Truly have no idea.
Yeah, that's right. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.